Hey there, it's Dan Ferris, editor of Extreme Value, and this video is inspired by a guy that I met in 2007. Um, his name was Carl Hill, and I met him at the Grants Interest Rate Observer Conference in New York City. Grants does 2 conferences a year. They're wonderful events, and Carl was an unusual fellow. He was a banker from Georgia, and his bank was very small. It had like 75 or 79 million of assets, very small. And he was kind of bored with that around 2000 or 2001 or 2 or so. And so he started managing other people's money. And he was a real sort of modest, kind of humble, very intellectual guy. And he looked like an old farmer, he's kind of stooped over, and he had this rumpled suit and this slow southern drawl, but he was a real intellectual guy, like Greek and Latin and finance and things. He was really smart. And he turned $3 million into $54 million in about 7 years, and he had bought home building stocks after the dot-com bust. He figured the Fed's going to print lots of money, and they're going to take interest rates way down low, so buying a home is going to be a no-brainer for a lot more people than it used to. And he got that right, and he got out largely at the top. And when I met him in 2007, I just talked with him very briefly after he gave his speech at the Grants Conference. He was going whole hog into small-cap Canadian mining stocks because he said, well, I think something terrible is going to happen, and the Fed's going to print a lot of money. And he said, very tragically, he thought it was the most certain thing in the world that mining stocks were going to soar because the price of all the mined commodities was going to soar because of what he thought the Fed was going to do. And, he was right about what the Fed did, but of course, the mining stocks crashed along with everything else, and then they kind of made a second top in 2011 or 12, something like that. Most of them by 2012 had topped out and went into a brutal bear market. But Carl wasn't even around for that second rally because he tragically took his own life. He had taken in a lot of money from a lot of friends, and he viewed this thing as the most certain thing in the world. And of course, the mining stocks crashed along with everything else before they rallied for a second time. And he didn't make it. He didn't stick around longer for that, second rally. And he took his own life, and I thought, wow, that's really. It was a horrible thing when I found out about that, because he was such a nice guy. You could just, he was very humble. You go to New York and you see all these people in fancy suits, and they think they're all more important than God, and they think they have more money than God, and they're smarter than God. And then you see a guy like Carl among them, and you think, man, that guy, he's got it all over these other guys. And yet, emotionally, he just couldn't handle the crash. And there are situations today that remind me of this most certain thing in the world mistake that Carl Hill made. For example, a recent report by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, they do a fund manager survey. And they do it every so often, and they find out what the most crowded trade in the world is. And the most crowded trade in the world today, Tuesday, January the 23rd, 2018, I think the report came out a day or 2 ago, is short volatility. So you know what the VIX is, right? The fear index. So if you think that stocks are going to keep going up and up and up, then fear is going to keep going down and down and down, right? And people are going to be less afraid of stocks, and therefore the VIX will continue to make new lows. And it has done that since about 2012. It's been a good trade. If you started shorting the VIX in 2012, you made a lot of money. There was one fellow they interviewed was a manager at Target, and he claims to have increased his net worth from something like $500,000 to something like $12 million by shorting securities tied to the VIX. You can't buy the VIX. You have to buy some kind of an ETF that buys futures that are tied to the VIX. But even then, the futures, you know, when you buy gold futures, if you hold on to them long enough, you can take delivery of real gold. You can't do that with VIX futures because it's just an index. So the VIX futures and the VIX index, they don't correlate as well as, you know, gold prices and gold futures and things where you can get real delivery. So the products based on those futures don't perform very well. They're garbage, in fact, the VIX ETFs. So shorting them was kind of a smart thing to do for a while. But I'm afraid that people think of it now with this Bank of America Merrill Lynch report as the most certain thing in the world, is that volatility is going to keep falling and falling and falling, and stocks are going to keep rising and rising and rising. And it just reminds me of a previous time. It reminds me of when everybody thought, well, you know, it may be the most overvalued moment in history at the top of the dot-com bubble, but it's okay because I'm holding Microsoft, and I'm holding Dell, and I'm holding Cisco, and I'm holding all these wonderful companies. The problem with that is if you bought at the top, which a lot of people do, that's why it's at the top of the dot-com bubble, it took you until last year to break even on Microsoft, not including dividends. You know, you maybe take another year off of that, so maybe it only took 16 years to break even instead of 17. And even Coca-Cola, I think, took about 12 years or 13 years to break even. Cisco still hasn't broken even. Intel still hasn't broken even. These are the highest quality companies you could own. And I feel like today people are looking at Amazon and Facebook and Google and Apple and other companies like that. In other words, today, the most certain thing in the world in many people's minds seems to be that holding Amazon is the no-brainer bet of the century. And they just don't have the imagination, just like people in 1999 didn't have the imagination that buying the very best when everybody wants to own the very best is a very bad idea. And in fact, I've seen some work by the folks at Research Affiliates and other folks that suggests that high quality is a bad bet a lot of the time because everybody knows about it. Everybody thinks high quality is a great bet, the high quality businesses. And that's why things like, you know, price to book value and these other value metrics and even momentum over time do better than high quality stocks. And they measure quality by things like return on assets, return on equity, maybe consistency of profit margin or something like that. You get the picture though. So here we are at another one of these moments in history when everybody thinks the most certain thing in the world is to buy the greatest companies in the world and just forget you own them. And I'm afraid people lack imagination. They don't understand how horribly it can turn out. And it can turn out as badly as it did in the dot-com bubble. It can turn out as badly as poor Carl Hill's mining stocks turned out in the great financial crisis. It can turn out horribly, and people don't get it. Don't be one of those people. Don't think you've got the most certain thing in the world just because you own Amazon and Google and Facebook. Try to have a bit of an imagination. Hold a balanced portfolio. Hold a bunch of cash. Short bad stocks in bad industries. Be smart. Only buy stocks when you have a sufficient margin of safety. Okay? Don't make that mistake. Don't view anything in the stock market as the most certain thing in the world. Okay? I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.